My parents left me out of the family Christmas postcard photo, including only my adopted brother to present their perfect family. They claimed my disability would spoil the picture. A week later, my grandma arrived with an early Christmas gift that brought my parents to tears. I, a 17-year-old female, have a younger brother, Nathan, who is 15. I've always felt that my parents preferred him over me. Nathan is adopted. My parents brought him into our family around 9 years ago. He fits right in, and I would even say that he looks more like a part of my family and like the kind of child my parents should have than I do. I'm not saying this because I want to, but because my parents have joked about this several times. I feel like they don't really mean it as a joke. My family is conventionally attractive, they could be on the cover of a magazine. Unfortunately, I don't really fit in. I was diagnosed with type 2 diabetes as a kid, making it difficult for me to lose weight. My parents tried to control my portions, and whatever I consumed was strictly monitored by them. It felt like they were starving me. It was already hard for me to maintain a healthy weight, and my irregular eating habits made it impossible to lose weight. I'm quite overweight now. Then, I was diagnosed with fibromyalgia. For the past 3 months, I have intermittently used a wheelchair because the symptoms are severe and I have frequent flare-ups. Life had already been difficult for me, as I was an introverted kid. The way I was treated at home was not ideal. After my diagnosis, things got worse. Earlier, I was just overweight, but now I am the fat kid in a wheelchair. I was struggling mentally, and my parents did nothing to help me improve my situation. They made it worse by treating me like a burden. So, I started restricting myself to my room as much as I could because I didn't want to bother them. It's incredibly lonely, but I can't help it. I don't want to feel like I'm constantly disappointing everyone around me. I always felt like they didn't really want me as part of their family, but I would deal with it by shaking off these thoughts. However, after an incident a couple of weeks ago, it became much more difficult. Almost 3 weeks back, my parents were discussing the Christmas postcard we send out every year. The next day, I got dressed in the red outfit and went to the living room for the family photograph, a ritual for years. I thought that despite everything, this would remain constant, and I would still feel like part of my own family. But they took that away from me. When they saw me, they got awkward and said that this time it would only be the 3 of them because I was in a wheelchair, and they didn't want to spoil their photograph. I was shocked. I tried to bargain, saying I would stand for a couple of pictures, but they insisted I stay in the wheelchair and let them take the photos. It was clear they didn't want me in the picture. I went back to my room and cried myself to sleep. No one even came to check on me. It was a horrible day at the end of a horrible year. I couldn't bear it. I called my grandmother and told her everything. My grandma is my dad's mother. She's a wonderful person who loves me more than anyone else. I would have gone to live with her, but I was hoping my parents would change. That day, I realized it was never going to happen. My grandmother knew my parents didn't treat me well and had often asked me to move in with her. That day, I told her I wanted to leave and live with her because I wasn't wanted here. I had known this for a long time but had been fighting it because they were my parents, and this was my family. But if this was my family, I was better off without one. She was there for me that day, comforting me over the phone. She promised to take me away as soon as she returned from her cruise with friends. I made her promise to take me away, and after that, I didn't say anything to my parents. They didn't bother to apologize for excluding me from the photograph. They pretended everything was normal, and so did I, knowing I would be rescued soon. My grandmother showed up last week. For 7 days, I barely spoke to my parents or Nathan. I went to school, came back home, and stayed in my room. When my grandmother visited, I opened the door for her. My parents didn't know what was happening and acted normally. But my grandmother wasn't having it. She asked them why I hadn't been included in the Christmas postcard. The postcards hadn't been sent out yet, so my parents were confused. They realized I must have told her about the incident and, instead of acting apologetic, they rolled their eyes at me, saying I had no reason to make a big deal out of it. They offered the same explanation: they didn't want to bother me by having me stand for the picture, and if I had my wheelchair in the photo, it would spoil it. I pointed out that I had offered to stand but they refused, showing they didn't want me in the picture. I said they had always treated me like an outsider, even though it wasn't my fault. I told them it was ironic that Nathan, who was adopted, was treated more like their flesh and blood than I was. They considered me a burden. Nathan and I used to be close as children, but he distanced himself after observing how our parents treated me. In the end, I was left with no one in the household. At least Nathan had the sense to look away because he knew I was right. My parents got mad at me for saying Nathan was adopted, as if he didn't know. He was 6 when he joined our family, and I had never thought less of him because he wasn't biologically related to me. But my point was still true: he always received the treatment I didn't because he looked like my parents' child, and I didn't. I had started resenting all of them because of how I was treated. My parents didn't apologize or act sorry. They just said I was spoiled and nasty for bringing up that Nathan was adopted,